Today's discussion will be whether kohanim are allowed to go to the cemetery to visit the grave of a tzaddik. Before we begin, I'd like to once again mention that one should not rely upon this for a regular halacha, and one should consult a rav before doing any action, especially when you're dealing with a kohen to visit the grave of anybody that he's not allowed to, which is a potential biblical prohibition. So, whenever I mention the shaila to people, they always ask me, what's the reason why he would be allowed to go? We know that it's asur midoraisa, that a kohen is not allowed to go to the grave, to go to visit the cemetery. There are certain people that he's allowed to, but to go to, let's say, Rav Akiva's grave or Rav Shimon bar Yochai's grave, what would be the reason to allow it? It should be asur. And from the fact that most people respond that way, tells us that obviously the minhag amongst Klal Yisrael, the accepted custom amongst Klal Yisrael, is to not allow it. But let's at least analyze whether there's any room historically in sources to allow such a thing. So, there were poskim who did allow it. Again, I don't believe that's the custom. I believe that everyone would tell you that nowadays, as we'll see, most poskim say it's not allowed. But there was a small group of poskim who did allow it. And where did it come from? So it came from a Medrash and Mishle. The Medrash and Mishle, Siman Tuf Kuf Mem Daled, writes a very interesting story. It talks about the end of Rav Akiva's lifetime. Rav Akiva died. A lot of people think that he was combed to death, which he was, but the Medrash has a slight variation of how he actually died. The Medrash says that Rav Akiva had a major student. His name was Rav Yeshua Hagarsi. Rav Yeshua Hagarsi was Rav Akiva's sort of shamish. He would bring him food every day in prison. So, Erev Yom Kippur, Rav Yeshua Hagarsi said goodbye to Rav Akiva. He went home, probably getting ready for Yom Kippur. As he left, Rav Akiva alone, Rav Akiva died. So the Medrash tells us that Eliyahu Hanavi came to Rav Yeshua Hagarsi's house, and he knocked on the door. Rav Yeshua Hagarsi said, "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" So Eliyahu Hanavi said, "First of all, I'm a kohen," because Eliyahu Hanavi, according to most midrashim, was Pinchas, and Pinchas was a kohen. So Eliyahu says, "I'm a kohen, and I'm here to tell you that Rav Akiva has died, and it's time that we go get his body and bury him." So the Medrash says they went back to get him, and a miracle happened that all the guards and all the wardens and everyone was sleeping, and the doors of the jail cell were completely open. They were left open, obviously through a miracle, and they went and they found Rav Akiva's body. So Eliyahu Hanavi, the Medrash says, took Rav Akiva and put him on his shoulders and started taking him out. At which point Rav Yeshua Hagarsi asked Eliyahu Hanavi, "I thought you said you're a kohen, so why are you touching the body of Rav Akiva? Kohanim aren't allowed to contaminate the dead bodies." So Eliyahu Hanavi responded with the following: "Amar lei chayecha, Rav Yeshua. I swear, Rav Yeshua, beni chas v'shalom, she'ein tuma b'talmidei chachamim v'af b'talmideihem." You should know it's not a problem at all, because the bodies of tzaddikim do not give off tumah. There's no tumah with talmidei chachamim, v'af b'talmideihem. So because there's no tumah being transmitted, Rav Akiva was such a high level that there's no tumah being transmitted from his body, it's not a problem. So this medrash clearly tells you that it's okay that if someone's on the level of a tzaddik. Now, what's the definition of a tzaddik? It's hard to know, but if someone's on the level of tzaddik Rav Akiva, you can go to Rav Akiva's kever. Because the Eliyahu Hanavi himself said it beferish. He said, "I'm allowed to touch, even though I'm a kohen, I'm allowed to touch the dead body of Rav Akiva, because he's a Talmid Chacham, and Talmidei Chacham do not give off tumah." Now, I want to focus on this source because this is the major source. There are other sources that some people point to, but this is the major source I want to focus on for today. It seems clear from this medrash that it is a problem to touch. That it's completely okay for someone a kohen to visit the grave of a tremendous tzaddik, someone on the level at least of Rav Akiva, because tzaddikim of that caliber does not give off tumah, as was said by Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay, so it seems like it's mutter. But there's a Taisus in Bava Metzia. The Taisus in Bava Metzia says in Kuf Yudal Mebeis that it's not true. Rav Akiva, Eliyahu Hanavi was actually not telling the truth. Let me explain. Eliyahu Hanavi grabs Rav Akiva's body and puts him on his shoulder. At which point Rav Yeshua Hagarsi asked Eliyahu, "Why are you allowed to do that? You're a kohen and he's a dead body." So Eliyahu responded, it's okay because he's a Talmid Chacham, and Talmidei Chacham Tzaddikim do not give off Tumah. Their bodies don't transmit Tumah. Says Tosas, that wasn't the reason why Eliyahu Hanavi grabbed Rav Akiva and put him on his shoulder. That wasn't the reason why it was okay. There's a much more simple explanation as to why he was allowed to do that, and that is, we know that although a kohen is not allowed to touch a dead body, he is allowed to bury a mace mitzvah, which means that if a kohen comes and he finds a body just in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of the desert, and there's no one to bury the body, a kohen is supposed to, he's obligated to bury the body. It's called a mace mitzvah. So says Tosas, the reason why Eliyahu Hanavi was allowed to bury Rav Akiva is because Rav Akiva was a mace mitzvah. Think about Rav Akiva's situation. He's the great Rav Akiva. He's sitting alone in a jail cell. No one's willing to go in because no one would try to steal a body from a jail cell at that time. Eliyahu Hanavi is the only one who's willing to go in. So that's called a mace mitzvah. That's the reason why he's allowed to touch him. Is not because he's a Talmid Chacham and Talmidei Chacham don't transmit Tumah. It's a much more simple explanation. It's because that he was a mace mitzvah, and that's why he was allowed to come in contact with the body. Says Tosfos that Eliyahu Hanavi was docha. If someone bothers you with a question, sometimes you don't even want to get involved with the answer. You just sort of give him an answer, whether it's true or not, just to shut him up, so to speak. So Eliyahu Hanavi, the reason why he said what he said to Rav Yeshua Garsi, that the reason why I'm touching the body of Rav Akiva is because he's a tzaddik, and tzaddikim do not transmit tumah, that wasn't the truth. He just wanted to sort of stop the questions. But the real reason why he was allowed to is because of Meis Mitzvah. That's what Tosas says. Now, I think it's a little problematic, as the Ramban in Yavamis Daf Samach Aleph writes. It's a little problematic to say that Eliyahu Hanavi sort of paskined incorrectly, meaning he said a halachic ruling that wasn't correct just to shut someone up. That's a little bit problematic, but that's what Tosas says. The Eshkol in Chelik Beis, one of the Rishonim, Daf Kuf Ayin Hey, writes very simply. Ein somchin al halachos shebe midrashim im lo nirish and iskabu l'bali hatalmud. Very simple. We do not rely on midrashim for halachic rulings if the Gemara does not seem to agree with it. Meaning, the Gemara, he doesn't say where, but the Gemara, the impression that the Eshkol got from learning Gemara was that the Gemara was not in favor of people visiting the graves of tzaddikim. So because the Gemara was not in favor, even if you feel that this medrash does allow it, we don't rely on midrashim. Midrashim are usually thoughts of the Tanaim on Chumash. It's not meant for halacha. So because it wasn't meant for halacha, we don't rely upon it. Even if the medrash actually means to allow it, if the Gemara seems to disagree with that, we go with the Gemara. Now, where does the Gemara seem to disagree with this? It's very simple. The Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah says that we know there's a concept of Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni means that there were certain people in the desert by Moshe Rabbeinu who were tameh. They were spiritually impure and they weren't able to partake in the Korban Pesach. So they made a Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara in Chavhei Mebeis and Sukkah asks, what were they doing that they were tameh? So according to Rav Yosef HaGlili, the Gemara says they were the ones who were carrying the bones of Yosef HaTzadik, and they got tameh by touching the bones. So it's clear from that Gemara, if the Medrash is correct that tzaddikim do not transmit tumah, then how are these people tameh from touching the bones of Yosef HaTzadik? Yosef HaTzadik was Yosef HaTzadik. It's in his name. So clearly the Gemara implies that there is a tumah even by tzaddikim, and therefore we don't rely upon such a Medrash. Let me just explain very quickly. I might go a tiny bit over, but I just want to explain. The Sachat Shavah, the Avnei Nezer writes, very, very clear in Yeredesim Tuf Yud Zayin Sivkatan Yud Zayin. He wants to try to make everything work. He wants to try to explain why Rav Akiva did not give off Tumah, but Yosef HaTzadik did. Seemingly it's just a machlokas, but says the Avnei Nezer that's not true. The Avnei Nezer says, you know where Tumah comes from? Tumah comes, the reason why dead body are tameh, Rav Chaim Vital and the Ramban write, when the Malach HaMavis comes to take the body, the way the Malach HaMavis does it is he drips tumah into the body, and the neshama is so repelled by it that the neshama automatically leaves. So the tumah that a dead body has, the tumah of Beis HaKvaris, the reason why we wash our hands afterwards, the whole tumah that stems in a cemetery, it stems from the encounter that the person had with the Malach HaMavis when he died. So the Avnei Nezer says, if you could have people that never encountered the Malach HaMavis, then they would not have tumah. He quotes the Zayar that says that someone who's murdered was not killed through the Malach HaMavis. someone who's murdered was killed by the person who killed him, not by the Malach HaMavis. However, that I can't understand that for myself, and I definitely can't explain it. But the Zohar writes very clearly, Seif Parsha Shoftim, that when someone is murdered, he is not killed by the Malach HaMavis. So therefore, says the Avnei Nezer, the reason why the Eliyahu Navi was able to touch Rav Akiva is because Rav Akiva did not have Tumah. Why didn't he have Tumah? Because someone who's murdered like Rav Akiva never encountered the Malach HaMavis, and therefore, because he never encountered the Malach HaMavis, he never had the Tumah. Yosef, a Tzaddik who died under normal conditions, was killed by the Malach HaMavis, he did have Tumah. And therefore, according to the Avnei Nezer, if someone is murdered, then there won't be Tumah, but if someone died regularly, then there would be Tumah. Similarly, the Karakemach, Rabbeinu Bechai writes in Karakemach, that if someone died through Misas Neshika, like Moshe Rabbeinu didn't die through regular terms, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he wasn't killed by a Malach HaMavis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'kvoda Ba'asma, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took his neshama. So because he didn't die through the interaction with the Malach HaMavis, there is no Tumah. So you would be allowed to, he says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi died that way, and that's why people were allowed to go to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's grave. Again, this is all back and forth. So basically, what it comes out is that according to many Rishonim, you're never allowed to go. According to the Medrash, it seems you're always allowed to go to the grave of a tzaddik. And according to Avnei Nezer and the Karakemach, it seems that you'd be allowed to go to certain tzaddikim who were murdered, or tzaddikim who died through HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking the neshama himself. But I want to make it very clear: the accepted psak amongst Klal Yisrael is not to allow people to go to tzaddikim under any circumstance, and that's the normative halacha. This whole discussion was just as a background, but the Yaskel Avdi writes in Chilek Ches, Staf Kuf Tzadi Beis, that under no circumstances is someone is a kohen allowed to go, especially you're dealing with a potential biblical prohibition, and therefore I make it clear, a kohen should not go to a tzaddik under any circumstance. There are certain cemeteries where it's possible they were built in a way that there is no tumah problem, that you have to speak to a rav, but to just go based on the assumption that tzaddikim's bodies do not give off tumah is not allowed, and especially certain people, I've been told, that wanted to go to Anna Lubavitcher Rebbe's kever. First of all, it's not allowed because based on this, we don't rely upon this halacha, and you would also need a tzaddik to be the caliber of someone who died through HaKadosh Baruch Hu's interaction, which it's hard to say anyone of our days is on that level. And also, practically, to get to his grave, you have to go through a cemetery, so it should not be allowed. And therefore, to summarize, there was a discussion amongst the poskim, but one should not rely upon this for halacha, and one should not, kohen should never visit a tzaddik, the grave of a tzaddik. Questions could be sent to me at avizakatinsky@gmail.com, avizakutinsky@gmail.com.